A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. Now, there are many advantages of sharing your community stories. Stories offer insight and lessons from real-life experiences and provide valuable learning opportunities, helping individuals make informed decisions and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Daniel Holder is back with us again this week to continue his mini thesis on the community of Whitehall. This week he begins by speaking of the entrepreneurial spirit of the community.
Yeah, Sherwood, you know I spoke about businesses in the village before, and I particularly mentioned shops. But you know, as I go along, things do come back to me, and I remember two businesses in particular. One was a shop in Whitehall, number 2, run by a lady called Miss Hall. Yes, the shop, but particularly she sold black pudding and sauce on Saturdays. And of course, you know, all would gather around to get this black pudding and sauce. And can you imagine buying a piece of black pudding for 3 cents? Yes. That was the price. Of course, you can understand that in the context that then a soft drink would have cost 12 cents. So a piece of black pudding for 3 or 6 cents was a good thing to get. But, and of course, as boys, you know, with very limited funds, we managed to purchase some of our fare, but you could supplement later on in the evening when she had finished. You could supplement or even satisfy your taste for some of this black pudding. But how that came about is the black pudding water, because the pudding would burst some of it when she was, you know, boiling it and so on. And so lots of the stuffing remain in the saucepan. And so she would make that available to some of the boys from the district. And so you could, as I say, you could get your fill from this thing. The only thing about it, there was one thing, is that sometimes it had a bit more pepper than usual, and it would have a telling effect on you later on. and that was the thing. There was another business too, run, that was in Medford Road, run by a man called Wyatt Allen, and that was in the 60s, 70s. He had a small factory, and he produced hot sauce. He had 2 types of hot sauce. One was, and the labels were Inner Beauty. Now, the Inner Beauty was the mild one. But then there was one called Golden Acre, which was for those whose palate could tolerate something stronger. Right? He also produced spices and coffee, and neatly packaged. I mean, you know, as much as or as good as modern factories would produce. And he had a good business going. He employed a number of young ladies, but unfortunately, after some years, that business disappeared. And kind of the early days of establishing industry in Barbados. And I spoke about the bakery as well before, the bakery being a very important part of the community. Now, people benefited from the bakery in as much as, again, we're looking at a village where most of the people were agricultural workers, domestic servants, shop attendants, those kinds of things, housewives. And so money was often a challenge for many of the people. So you could go to the bakery on mornings, or, yeah, thereabout, and you could buy stale bread. We say stale bread, it was only a day old, having gone to the shops, and nowadays I suppose they were called them returns, but then it was stale bread. And people could come to the shop and buy 10 cents. They would come to the shop and call for 10 cents in stale. Now, 10 cents in steel meant that you got a bag with at least 8 to 10 bread. When, of course, you understand that you get at that price, because salt bread were being sold at 2 salt bread for 5 cents. And rock cakes and turnovers and so on were being sold at 5 cents. So you could understand that you would get a bag of bread, 10 or 8 or 10 bread for 10 cents. And people took advantage of that, welcomed the opportunity. And of course, many students who were going from the village who attended secondary school in the absence of school meals were able to get their lunch from that quote-unquote stale bread. But it really helped a number of people in the village. Lots of the people too in the village were agricultural laborers. They worked on the large plantation. They had their own plots, I mentioned before. And many of them sent their children to school. Not many of them were able to go to all the secondary schools, given that places were limited. But many of the children in the district went to the private secondary schools. And they were able to go to these schools because their parents kept animals in kitchen garden and so on, and paid school fees for them. And of course, at that time, school fees, the sum would look small in today's terms. School fees were like $25 a term. By the 1970s, the average school fees for schools, you know, metropolitan community, modern, Paragon, those, Wakefield, Washington, Green Lynch, Lynch's secondary, would have been like something like $35 to $40. But that, for many people, I know cases where people had to borrow money when the school fees time came around. They didn't have the money. They would then have to borrow the money until a meeting turn came, or until they killed the sheep, pig, cow, whatever, and sold it.
The ingenuity of our people, the clever ways in which they ensured that their children's school fees and supplies were well provided for. Well, speaking of earning legitimate money, Daniel shares an experience where he earned money from performing an important role in the community.
I don't think that many people in the village knew that one of my first jobs was that of a postman. Now, let me explain. There were some young ladies in the village between like 18 and 20. And I remember two in particular, who shall remain nameless. And there was a chap who would come in the village to work. And they sort of took a liking to him. So, and he got wind that that was the case, so he would talk to them and so on. So what would happen, letters would pass between the young man and these girls, and somehow they made use of my services as a postman. I would be taking these letters to or fro. Of course, it was a little reward for me. So that might have been my first paid employment, or part of my first employment.
And that was done at a time when he was a schoolboy. Now, speaking of schoolboy, there was a number of primary schools in the community, and they no longer exist. However, a building and an open space stand as sacred monuments to primary education in the community of Whitehall.
On the right side, there was the Edge Hill Memorial Girls School, overlooking the harbor and the sea coast, so to say. Yeah, so the girls from the village would go to school my sisters and so on would have gone to school at Edge Hill. The boys at Montgomery. But it was an interesting thing because we talk about co-ed education. While I was at primary school, there were some girls at the boys' school. And there were a few boys at the girls' school. I don't know why that happened, but that was so. So, in fact, I remember at one time in primary school, we were enacting Georgie Porgy, putting up I played the part of Georgie Porgy, and there were girls involved. So, there were girls at the boys' school. So, co-ed, yes, even, but of course you know that the private secondary schools, most of them were co-ed. You might have had the exception, like say Winifred and so on, and Presentation and those, but for the most part, those schools were co-ed schools. But we think we are told in the Bible that there's nothing you want to decide.
Children games have played a significant role in human development and culture for centuries. Many children games are played with others, fostering social interaction, cooperation, and teamwork. Children learn to negotiate, take turns, communicate, and develop empathy and emotional intelligence.
Of course, what is village life without games? We played a number of games. Of course, if you are truly Bajan, truly village, you play cricket. We played cricket all over the place. We played it in the road, on dirt surfaces, on grass, wherever we could. And of course, playing cricket in the road meant that one of the things, you could not hit a house full. If the ball hopped and hit the house, okay. When a fella hit the house full, we used to say the big hammer catch him, right? But the thing about that, and of course you're playing cricket with sometimes 15, 20 boys in the road. So you had people all about. And the thing about that is that it taught the fellas how to bat. Because invariably, if you hit the ball in the air, if you struck the ball in the air, there was always a pair of hands somewhere, given that there were so many boys playing, to pluck this ball out of the air. So you had to learn to play strokes, to hit the ball along the ground and so on. And I suppose at that time that resulted in a number of Barbadian batsmen coming out of that time who were very good stroke players. West Indian cricketers and particularly Barbadian cricketers were known as fellas who could hook, because it was a dare. If a fella came and bowled at you, you were not supposed to duck. You had a bat in your hand. He had a ball, you had a bat. So he bowled, you batted. And that was the thing, so you were not supposed to duck. We were also very good at on driving and flicking, because the ball is coming at your feet. And in the absence of pads, well, you had to defend your feet with the bat. And we played with various balls. Some were nut ball, a ball called a rubber line compo that when it hit in the road, it just flew. We had sponge balls, fur balls, two-color balls, rubber strand balls, knit balls. And sometimes there was an area we used to play cricket behind Lord Radius' house by the way, that had a breadfruit tree. And sometimes the breadfruits became our balls. The young breadfruits which drop off of the tree. And you know boys will be boys. Sometimes you go and you find a breadfruit, you bowl and so on. But then you would find a soft or a breadfruit which had fallen off the tree too. A small one, soft, very soft. And of course, you came and you bowled a very juicy full toss at the batsman. He opened his eyes wide, because this thing is sugar. But it wasn't sweet, because the breadfruit was splattered. and that happened. But as boys, you know, boys will always be boys, right? And sometimes we as younger boys would challenge the older boys. We were 13 to 16, and those chaps were 18, 25, and so on. We would challenge them to a match. Of course, more often than not, we would lose the game, but we did not go down without a fight. We really, because it was a matter of pride and bragging rights. But often enough in playing games, adults would be around to supervise us, even if it's just a matter of looking out through a window, and made sure that there was fair play. They helped to give us a sense of fair play and right and wrong. So if a fella got out and didn't want to give up, some adult who might have been a spectator either in the house or just around would say to that fella, yes, you're out, or no, he's not out. Because sometimes the boys, as boys, would do some things. Playing cricket, playing in the road, now you can't drive the stumps into the ground. So we made some, sometimes we made stumps of a frame, that frame covered in galvanized, a piece of galvanized. So you're batting, and all these fellas gather around the stumps and so on. And the bowler balls a ball. And as soon as it passes your bat, someone there behind the stump would have a stone, not a stone of some size, but not of great size. And I would, once the ball passes the wicket, the stump, fellas would throw this toss, flick it quickly and hit the stump. You out, because you don't know, so you hear this impact. The ball gonna pass the bat, you hear this impact, and you figure that you can be out. But the boys, as we say, will always be boys. But the adults made sure that we played fair. They pass on some skills to us as well, because you would go to help a carpenter or mason, and invariably, every boy in the village had some basic carpentry skills, and that enabled us to make our scooters and our trolleys and sometimes box carts as necessary, because we had picked up those skills because of our association with an adult who was a carpenter and that kind of thing. And sometimes they would call you aside and speak to you and sort of put you on the right path, or give you some moral guidance, or advise you in terms of your future, what you should be doing and that sort of thing. Sometimes even if you find yourself talking to a young lady, they will speak to the young lady, sometimes speak to you and warn you to be careful and so on. Of course, the girls played the game. They played rounders, they played picks-up, hopscotch and so on. And sometimes the boys would just join in, a fun thing, go and have a little hop and a skip there, hopscotch, or a little game around us with the girls having fun. I was speaking with a friend of mine some time back, and he reminded me that we had this swing. We called it in Beijing a swinger. In a mango tree, it was high up, and the fellas would push you, and you would go high. I really mean high. And sometimes, the girls would come and say, I want a little swing. Well, a little swing turned out to be quite big, because the fellas would push them easily, and then they would find themselves almost in the top of the mountain, because this thing was really, fun. I suppose people might say, you shouldn't do that. There's nowadays, but we enjoyed ourselves playing those games, played football as well. And an interesting thing about the football is that the football then, they had a leather outer and in a tube, and it had a lace. So you'd pump up the ball and then lace the thing together. Sometimes the inner tube would get burst. You'd go and buy an inner tube, replace it. These balls were, especially when they got wet, they were heavy, really, because the leather, that kind of thing. And when the stitches became kind of loose, we would take it to the local shoemaker, have him stitched it, and we were ready to go again. Of course, we have all these fancy modern balls nowadays. They don't have that. It is a complete thing without the lace and so on. Before Rotterdam Park was constructed, it was part of the Rotterdam Estate, which was a 30-acre, very small thing. But then they abandoned the fields in terms of turning it into for home construction. And the houses in Rotterdam there are built on they're floating, not a foundation which was dug into the ground. They're pushed away all of the topsoil and then put down a covering of and built the houses. But before that happened, they had 2 heaps of this mold. But you know how boys are. So we started this game. We're divided into 2 groups, one on the northern side and one on the southern side, and we would prepare our arms. We would make mud balls. And then it started, we would meet in the middle. And that was fun for us. You know, fellas, boys would find ways and means of doing these things, you know, fun. You know, nobody got injured in any serious way, but we enjoyed it. You know, creatively so. I suppose people would talk about violence and so on nowadays, but I don't know. I grew up with a group of chaps, and they didn't go to prison and so on. We played our games, sometimes puss catch a corner and so on. Catcher, we used to play a serious game of catcher. We would walk to the top of Holders Hill. And you're at the top of Holders Hill, and home is Whitehall. There is no, you know, one time in playing catcher, you could say time or no, please. So you make sure that you get across there before the cat, you know, catch it with the whip. You know, puss catch a corner, you would think. We had a game, I don't know if, it's a game that I haven't heard about in Barbados elsewhere, maybe only one, a game we called Pan Cup. What used to happen is that you would draw a small circle in the road, and someone armed with a stick, or we had a top. Someone armed with a top would knock this thing as far as possible, and everybody would run. But there was someone who was there who would be calling you, and you would hide and so on. And the person who was there securing the top and so on, but we used to call that person the Pan Cup, would knock the top 3 times and would say, okay, if they see you there, James, come out from behind, sister. And if you were there, you're supposed to, and you sit down there. The whole idea was for that person to be able to call in everybody. But few little provisos. One is that from time to time, that person will have to give what you call a walk. They will have to walk away from the thought. Or sometimes they go looking for somebody. No, a fellow would ease up. And if he gets to the top before the Pan Cup, and he knocks it away, then all the others who had been caught before can run out and it start again. Right? But it was an interesting. Sometimes the fellows were clever, right? A fellow would knock the top, hit the top twice on the ground, and it's supposed to be 3 times, but he was called 1, 2, 3. If you aren't, and if he calls your name, and he says that you are behind the pole, but you perhaps are elsewhere, then you can come out and get a free hit off the top. But of course, if he only knocks it twice, and you aren't listening, he said, well, you knocked it twice, and he would knock 3 times, and you have to remain in. So sometimes there used to be a little dispute as to whether he had done it twice or the 3 times as required. But I haven't seen that game elsewhere at all. Yeah, but I'm sure that. But Carol Seal, I mentioned before, we played that Rodney and other chaps. Well, remember that. In fact, I was talking to Carl sometime back. He mentioned, yeah, this game that we used to play. But I don't know if it was such a highly localized game, because I've never heard of it. And I go all about the players, and I haven't heard. Interesting enough, we played football on Kearfield UE football field, because then it was truly an open campus. Yeah, we went down there without invitation, without any prior arrangement, and we would go there and play football, sometimes on evenings, sometimes on Saturday, and we had no problem whatsoever, because Kearfield was really truly part of the community then, the campus. We would pass through Kearfield on our way to the beach, if we were going to Paradise. It was a place that was open to all, so to speak. Clearfield then was known, the campus was known for its fetes. Yeah, Clearfield used to hold fetes often enough. And these fetes were open to all and sundry. So the older fellows would go down to the fetes at Clearfield, and people who did not even have any aspiration to study, further their studies, do a degree and so on, felt as though they were part of the university community. So they went down to the fetes, kind of thing. And I remember well, the fetes at Clearfield, some of them used to have the opals. No, it wasn't T-H-E, it was D-E. Because the opals at that time were managed by Elton Alombe Motley. And they had gone overseas on a tour, came back, and they were very much into this Afro-Caribbean music and so on. And often enough there would be effects. And I remember one of the lead singers then, he went off to Denmark afterward, Go Flute Richards. And, you know, the fellas would come dressed and so on, the opals. And they'll be singing songs, some of which I believe you are familiar with, things like Killalea, Killalea, Pom Pom, Ah Cha Cha, Mama T, and so on, the Afro. And part of one of the songs saying, this Afro Calypso rhythm send me back to our homeland. Killalea, Pom Pom, that was the song. So, yeah, so people, the fellows went off the campus and really immersed themselves, in a sense, into campus life. They had the Carnival campus, and the Calypso competition was attended, well attended, by people from the village, from in the neighboring Whitehall, Clearfield, Grisettes, Eden Lodge Village. And I remember, well, when you had people like Adonijah singing, that's where he started, as far as I can remember, singing Calypso at Clearfield. And I remember one year, there was a chap who sang a song about a well-known minister of government who had held almost every portfolio except the Ministry of Finance. And he sang about this minister, and he was dressed like this minister. And so those are the things I remember. As I say, Clearfield was open. You just went through an area, back area from the campus, through what we call the Mount, and up through Clearfield, back into Whitehall. Yeah, but things have changed out of necessity. You know, it is a bit more, there are a few more, well, some more restrictions now. But then it was quite an open place. And we had contact with students on campus and so on. And it was that kind of thing between the community and the Clearfield campus, right?
It is interesting that we should end on that note, for the Clearfield campus of the University of the West Indies is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. Thank you very much, Mr. Holder. The mini-series on Whitehall continues next week at the same time. Take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors.